Hello. So today, rather than an actual project, I thought I'd show you a technique that I really like. I do these when I've just got a couple of minutes to create something but not actually a full project, and then I pop them into my little collection of scraps and collage materials, and then I can use them later without having them sort of to be fully dry and everything. I can just set them aside to dry and then use them later. You can use Distress ink, you can use Distress Oxides. It will work with some other water reactive ink pads, but I tend to use mostly those. I've got here one of my homemade foam stamps. It's just a piece of MDF, it was some scrap. I just cut some little squares, just roughly, out of funky foam and glued them on. It's black because it's been used with paints, inks, all sorts of things. You could also die cut foam. You can use normal stamps. I'll show you this. I've used this foam one in the past. I've also used my acrylic stamps. It's best if there's a little bit of room either round the design, like this, or in between the design, or that it isn't a solid stamp. You can also do it with a solid object, like something like a wine cork. The end of that you could use. You could try all sorts of things, the middles of rolls of ribbon, anything, any mark making things you can use. I'll show you the results before we start. This one is done on a paper handkerchief. It's been separated out into the separate layers. I'll put that underneath and then you can see better. And I used Distress Ink Vintage Photo and a Tracy Evans stamp. It's the, what's it called? Let me find out. Splattered Numbers by All and Create. Tracy Evans designed it and I love it. It's one of my favourite stamps. I use it a lot. And that's the results with the Vintage Photo, which you can see it's divided into the separate colours. This isn't supposed to be a perfect crisp image. These will bleed out, but that's the effect I wanted. And you will get multiple layers. If you fold your tissue, you will get multiple layers. So that's the first one, which was a acrylic stamp, well, photopolymer stamp and Vintage Photo. There is this one. And I've put these layers are still together. I did separate them once it was dry. And this is this foam stamp, and you can see that's a very bled out version. That one not so much. It depends on which way you add your water. That was the top layer. There is also some lower layers. They get more indistinct the further down the pile of tissue you go. So obviously these were middle layers. And they lose a little bit of the shape depending on when you add the water. But the colour separation is gorgeous. I really love that. And I don't always want an image to transfer, I just want some colour with some visual texture. So this is ideal. So that one was 2 pieces of kitchen roll, which I then folded in half. So then we've got the top layer, the second layer, third layer and fourth layer. So you can see they get lighter as they go down. This one I stamped first, then spritzed water. This one I spritzed water and then stamped, so you can see the difference. I will be showing you how to do this in a moment. So that was blueprint sketch with one of my homemade foam stamps. So I'll put that there, out of the way. This is again the Tracy Evans stamp, but with the blueprint sketch on paper handkerchiefs. So you can see that's a nice effect as well if you want a nice pretty colour scheme. You can also do the technique using embossing folders. This is it's a Tim Holtz one. It's just the wood bark effect. And I just applied the ink, put the tissue in between. I didn't even run it through my die cutting machine. I just pressed it really well with my fingers so the ink transferred. Took the tissue out and applied water. So you can see there we get a nice random textural background, but with the separation of the colours. So we'll go ahead and have a go this time. I'm going to do two different things. This is a piece of kitchen roll, just cheap kitchen roll, not extra strong or anything, and I folded it into 4. This is a paper handkerchief, just again one from Aldi's, a cheap one, and I folded that into 4. Basically because I think the stamp I'm going to use is going to sit on there. So what I will do is I'll do one with Distress Oxides. So I'm just applying a real nice lot of ink to my stamp, a real good amount so it's well and truly covered. No bits where there isn't any ink. You've got lots and lots of ink on there. And I'll do that one onto the kitchen roll. And this time I'm just going to press it on really hard so that the ink transfers. I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds, just so that it absorbs in. I'll just get a baby wipe because I'm going to do a separate colour with the Distress ink. So there we are, we can see we've got a nice pattern there. Now I'll press my baby wipe on, this is just cleaning my stamp, my foam stamp basically. But I find I can use things like this in collaging if I get the ink off by just doing that. There we are, so I'll pop that away to dry somewhere. I'll just dry the water off. So then this is again the same foam stamp, and I will add Distress ink. Because my stamp's black, it's a little bit more difficult to see because the Distress inks don't show up quite as well because they aren't pigment on here. This is Mermaid Lagoon. So I've got plenty of ink on there, and then I'm going to stamp onto my paper hanky. There we are. Hopefully got plenty of ink. Yes, there we are. And then all I'm going to do is spritz with water. Now I fairly well saturate my kitchen roll and my tissues because I like the ink to spread a lot. If you don't want it to spread as much, don't put as much water on, and then it won't wick out as much. and then you've got to have a bit of patience just to wait while it does its thing. Some of the colours in the Distress ink separate differently to others. The Vintage Photo separates into more colours. Let's see if I can find the one I was showing you earlier. Where's it gone? I'll show you an underneath layer of one of the hankies with the embossing fold, and you see it's got yellows, oranges and browns in there because it's separated into the different colours. The Blueprint Sketch, which is a Distress Oxide, it separates into blues and pinks and lilacs, which is lovely. I love the way that separates. One of the other colours that I really like in a Distress Oxide for the separation of the colours is Frayed Burlap. It goes into a lovely peachy colour and a greeny colour. It's absolutely beautiful. There we are. So you can see this one isn't actually separating into different colours. It's the first time I've tried that colour, but it'll still be quite an interesting background. This one we've got lovely pinks round the edge. Now I'm just going to dry these so that you can see as they dry what happens. It will be a little bit noisy. I'll try and mute it when I edit the video. But if you keep an eye on these, you'll be able to see what happens when they dry. There we are. So you can see how it is wicked out from the edges of the stamp. But then if we separate the layers, these tissues are just, they've got perforations down both sides, so it's a little difficult getting them apart once you've got it started. And you must do this when they are dry. Try and do it when it's wet, they just fall to pieces. And you will lose a little bit of the edges. That's okay, it would do to be used up. It's not as impressive as some of the other Distress ink colours. And we've got a second and third layer. This one I really, really like. You can see it's got the turquoise, the blue and the pink in the layers. And when you open it up to the second layer, it's even more evident what colours go into the Blueprint Sketch. And then when you separate the layers, again, can see, where's my white piece of paper, you get some really pretty effects where it's separated. These sort of layers are nice to go onto ATCs and things like that for just building up a background. Again, that's the same ink and it's separated differently. This is the top layer. Sure, that's the top layer. Yep, that's the top layer. And as you can see, it also shows up the texture of the kitchen roll, because this has got little minute, not perforations, but just markings on it. So you could have it whichever side you wanted. And again, we've got a paler one with the pinks, turquoises and blues. So that's just a fun technique for creating layers of tissue which you can then add to backgrounds. I use decoupage glue, and rather than brushing, I tend to just dab because it's very, very delicate, more delicate than tissue paper. This does work nicely on tissue paper as well, and it is more robust, but this is just a cheap way of creating some background layers. While I've got my ink and everything out, I will do another one. Now this is just the handkerchief, paper handkerchief. And let's see, what colour shall we do? I'll do, let's see if this works. We'll try Dusty Cut Concord. And I can show you the effect that you can get if you just want a block of colour. I'll just press Dusty Concord really, really hard. So a nice lot of ink comes out. There we are. And then we'll spritz and see what colours come out of this one. It's quite interesting. As you can see, I'm saturating it more or less to get the colour to move nicely. And what you can do is saturate the back as well. I sometimes encourage it by just flattening the tissue down a little bit around the edges. It is a very random effect. As you see, sometimes it needs a little bit more encouragement just to move. So there we are, it's nearly dry, but as you can see, this is the top layer, and you've got this lovely darkening here. You've got the oxidization in the centre, but with little bits of dark. You can actually see it must have a little bit of yellow in the colour mix, because there's just a little bit of yellow around the edges. This one is probably the second one, and you can see the blue has come through. Then we've got possibly this one, which again the blue is showing, but we've got this nice marbling. And then this one is a lovely one. So we've got a little bit of texture from the tissue. We may lose that because when I try and separate it, it's bonded there, so we may lose that. But we've got this lovely veins and visual texture on there, which when those are completely dry and separated out, will be lovely to add to backgrounds on ATCs, on cards, whatever. And I will gently try and get that one apart. It isn't quite dry, so it might rip. And with actually folding the tissue into 4, you get lots of layers for one impression. Yes, that's a bit wet, so it's ripping, but anyway. So we've got 1, 2, and the bottom one will be very pale, but sometimes you could layer a pale one over something and just have whatever it is underneath showing. So we've got another one there and another one there. Let me get my white piece of paper. So you can see you get a lovely effect, which would be great to use on an ATC. Even just the very, very pale ones are pretty to add into projects. So we've got 12 small pieces of paper hanky tissue to add into backgrounds or use as we wish.